Welcome everyone to the second seminar of this term. Also, happy Chinese New Year. Today is the second day of Year of the Snake. Everything just means good luck, New Year, happy, whatever. I'm very honored to introduce Professor Ruth Patrick, our speaker of the day, who's a professor of social policy at the University of York. Her research aims to better understand the connect and disconnect between the narratives of poverty and welfare versus the everyday lived experiences of people whose lives actually rely on the social security. Dr. Patrick specializes in participatory, qualitative, and art-based approaches, and her work has been published in many prominent academic journals, including Social Policy in Society and Journal of Social Policy. Also worth mentioning that Professor Patrick's academic work is very much informed by her extensive experience outside academia or the so-called real world. For example, she's worked as a practitioner supporting offenders with their housing needs and worked for think tanks such as Poverty in Society and Institute for Public and Policy Research. So today we have the honor of hearing about her latest projects, COVID Realities and Changing Realities, which use an online participatory approach to studying and partnering with parents and carers on a low income. So without further ado, let's welcome Professor Ruth Patrick.
Thank you. I thought nobody would come, so it's always kind of busy. Everyone's going to show up. But so thank you for the invitation, and thanks to all. I know it's such a busy time. It's always a busy time, within the academy. So thanks for making time to come and listen and to discuss it with me. And advance apologies if it's like less coherent than I'd like it to be. A lack of time is something that characterises lots of our lives at the moment, and I definitely suffer from that. So it's probably less coherent than I'd like to be, but I also think we have to acknowledge those tensions that we have as academics, but also as parents. And we were just talking, weren't we, about how we hold all those things in tension. And so sometimes I think it's good to be open and transparent about those tensions. And if you see them in the work, like maybe be gentle. Well, no, you can tell me that it's bad, but that's part of the context. Okay, so the first thing that I wanted to say, and it's maybe an obvious thing to say, but I think it's really, really important, is that this is very much a collaboration. So although it's me kind of sitting here and talking to you today, this is the result of lots and lots of work and lots of collaborative work. And when we talk about who's involved in that collaboration, there are other academics, and I'd especially like to mention Maddie Power, who's currently on maternity leave, but who has sort of co-written a piece around hope and hope labour within participatory research, which I'm going to draw on a lot in this presentation, but also other academics. And then really, really importantly, and absolutely what we're going to talk about, is the parents and carers that we work with on changing realities. And I think there's lots, and we'll maybe come to it with what I say in the discussion, but there are lots of tensions, I think, between the fact that I sit here around this very nice table and get invited to come and speak, but those same parents aren't always invited in. And so I think we have to be honest and open about those tensions and what those tensions mean. But yeah, it is very much a collaborative piece, and lots of these ideas are being developed collaboratively. In terms of the outline of what I'm going to try and do today, I want to talk very much about hope and hopelessness, so about how we all might feel about the current moment politically, both domestically and internationally, and how we might theorise that in terms of ideas of hope and hopelessness. And then I also want to bring in changing realities and participatory work, and how we might think of that as a form of hope labour, so how the practice of participatory research can be hope generating. And then I also want to think maybe, though, about the ethical tensions that come with working with and through hope, and then especially within the neoliberal academy. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm trying to do quite a lot, and the ordering of that didn't feel straightforward, because there's quite a lot of building blocks to that in terms of talking about the current moment, talking about some sort of theoretical frames, and also telling you more about changing realities. So I'm going to jump around, but that's where I'm trying to get to. So you can tell me whether I managed or failed at the end. But I think just in terms of how we ground ourselves and how we kind of think about those ideas of hope and hopelessness, we can't, it's still January, it's still the month in which kind of Trump took office. And I think I found this kind of article in the New Republic helpful in thinking about that in terms of how many of us may be feeling sort of feelings of anger. So what Aaron says is, anger is one emotion I found to be surprisingly productive at times like this. That fury is a useful tool in demotivating times. It's like a slow burning fire, a smouldering back log that I can rev up when I need a source of emotional energy to keep me going, or throw some ash on when I don't. But anger alone is not enough to push through the forces of despair, which right now, for me at least, are ever present, waiting in the wings for a chance to sweep across the stage and take control. To keep those forces at bay, we also need to find our source of scope. And one of my central arguments that I'm trying to make today, and drawing on the work of others, is that anger can actually produce hope, so that we don't need to hold them in an opposition of each other. But I also just think we have to reflect on the current moment, and that feeling hopeless in the current moment is very understandable. And so, going straight in, because it's limited time, to sort of social security and poverty domestically, again, a very, very difficult context through which to feel hopeful. Okay, so I think what we see, especially within the UK, is we see this real collision of very, very high rates of child poverty and poverty generally, but then an apparent unwillingness to actually address that thing. So it's kind of this tension that child poverty and poverty is very high, but yet we're not seeing a willingness to really do much about it. And I think, obviously, and all of you will know lots and lots about this, lots of experts in the room about this, but there's been decades of underinvestment in our social security system. And then we still see, despite a Labour government, we still see the persistence of internationally unique policies like the 2-child limit. And, we're now, I don't know, are we 7-8 months into a Labour government, and the 2-child limit endures? And we know that every day, more and more children are born into a UK where the 2-child limit exists. And within that difficult context, we do see an unwillingness of almost any, and you can tell me which ones do this, but I don't think there's many mainstream politicians who will actually stand up and talk positively about social security. So this idea that social security can be a force for good, we're just not seeing. And I said I was talking about hopes, and but anyways, I remember about anger and despair. So, and I think that then what we're seeing, and we've seen very, very recently, is we're seeing some very difficult rhetoric and sort of policy announcements from the Labour government. So just last week, there was this announcement of the biggest fraud crackdown in a generation, and where they very explicitly, in some of the quotes, talked about the people that are defrauding the benefit system are taking away money from the NHS. So again, this feeling of othering, of saying this is a problem we need to crack down on, was very prevalent in those announcements. And then we had Keir Starmer speak to The Sun about, saying I've got the balls to take an act to Britain's benefits bill. And we also have this looming concern about how these disability benefit cuts are going to be actioned. So that is what we're hearing. That's the kind of public noise around the social security system. And this kind of just is what I said already, but I just think to really emphasize then what are the silences. And if I'd had loads of time, I'd have read about silence, because I think it's interesting. But we're not hearing really very much at all on child poverty as a policy problem. That's just not something we're hearing about. We're definitely not hearing about, and if anyone's got a direct line to Keir Starmer, can we tell him, we're not hearing about the very contributions that people can make outside the formal labour market. So we hear again and again about hard-working families, but there's no deconstruction of that. There's no nod to the fact that contribution can take many forms. And again, just echoing what I said already, we're not seeing anything on the positive role that social security system can play in preventing and reducing poverty. And I think, and again, just kind of coming to the end of what's difficult about the current moment, I think, what does this mean? What does this look like for families on a low income? And I'll tell you a bit more about changing realities in a minute, but one of the things that we do through changing realities is that we support parents and carers to make sort of interventions in the media, which are about trying to raise awareness of poverty. And so Gemma, who's a parent in Changing Realities, wrote an article in The Guardian, a comment piece that was setting out what life was like during that latest cold snap we had earlier this month. And she says, my children and I have been sleeping in the same bed to stay warm for the past week. This week I noticed condensation on the inside of the windows had started to freeze, so I brought the kids into my bed. As a parent, my job is to do all I can to shield the children from our financial struggles, My youngest now thinks it's a game to play Dragon Breath in the morning when the air is so cold in the house that we can see our own breath. And I just think that account is both very difficult but it's also very true. Like it is and with, you know, Kitty and I have done work on the 2-child limit and the benefit cap, and it very much resonates with this work. But also one of the things that I think we found from that work that was most maybe difficult is that those of us who research poverty have said for years about how parents will try and protect their children from the poverty that they face. But what we found in the 2-child limit study was how children were trying to protect their parents from the impact of the poverty. So children were saying, well, we heard from parents that children would try and conceal the fact that their shoes no longer fit because they knew that the parents didn't have money, or they'd ask siblings, you know, don't ask for something in the supermarket because mummy just doesn't have the money. And I think, you know, the emotional toll that places in the mental health effects are really important to talk about and surface and acknowledge. I think because of time, I won't go into this in detail, but this was and again, like jumping ahead a bit, but this was a diary entry from a Change in Realities participant who was talking about how difficult everyday life was for her. And one of the things she's talking about is how hard it is to feed herself and her child well because of not having enough money. And, you know, she says as well that, you know, at the beginning, she says, I'm feeling as though my reality is so fragile. I'm stood still and unable to do anything to change it. I firefight day to day. It is exhausting and ultimately unsustainable. And then, you know, she says, you know, towards the end of this, like quite long quote, but she says, you know, we need help. We need focused support to stop supplying health due to our low budget lifestyle. I never asked for a wanted this. My beautiful son never asked for a wanted this. When will it end? And I just wanted to show, because this is just a diary entry from last week. So these are the diary entries that are coming in about everyday life on a low income, you know, very much right now. Okay, so I am going to try and show a video now about, yeah.
Stories. We all have them. There's a time when we become accustomed to the reality of our lives. We overlook the mold in our privately rented property, our damp problem, and the pests we share our dwelling with. How long can I ignore my growing child's school trousers? How tight and short they are, and just after I've had to buy new school shoes for the new school year, as well as new PE kits. This month, an unexpected cost for dental care has put us on a back foot, and so I must go without lunches for a few weeks. It'll be okay. Well, this is what I tell myself. We'll be okay.
So just that woman.
Story.
Okay, no, we got it. So that, you know, so again, that's just kind of, you know, a bit of that context about what the contemporary moment looks like. So just to kind of pivot a bit in terms of why might we try and be hopeful, or where might we try and find hope, and we're going to come back to this later in the talk. Labour has committed to a child poverty strategy. So one of their sort of early acts, and it did tie in to the publication of the latest figures on the numbers affected by the 2-child limit and their failure to do something immediately on entering government, but they did announce a child poverty task force and a commitment to the UK's first child poverty strategy in over 7 years. And we're expecting that the timing of it keeps like shifting. So we're expecting it in spring, but apparently the civil service tell us that June is still spring. I mean, I don't know. And then there's now talk that it might shift. So it's coming, and it's co-chaired by, I think, Liz Kendall and Bridget Phillipson, but also possibly Angela Rayner has a role. And that there has been engagement with the strategy development process, and the engagement has included academics, and it's also included, they've been trying to include the voices of direct experience. And I'll come back to this, but they have given Changing Realities a specific role. They have also tried to get out, so they tried to get out around the country and find out what's happening. And I suppose, and again, we might come back to it in questions and comments, but it's a moment, isn't it? So it's a moment where they can do something different. The mood music isn't that hopeful, but it's a moment, and it's probably what we have at the moment to work with. So I just say that. And now I'm going to talk and introduce you all to Changing Realities and COVID Realities. And so the things that I want to say about that are that the project began, so COVID Realities began right at the beginning of the pandemic. So we're now coming up to, I guess, 5 years on the anniversary of that. And it was part of the Nuffield Foundation issued this rapid response. They wanted research on the pandemic and kind of maybe the differential experience of the pandemic. And lots of us knew immediately that the pandemic would be experienced differently for lots of different reasons, and that the socioeconomic circumstances were important there. So we put in this kind of, and I have this really vivid memory of doing it in my bedroom whilst I've got 4 children. So the 4 children were downstairs, and it was really like crazily timed. But we wanted to basically understand how parents were experiencing the pandemic, and we wanted to do that in a participatory way. So we wanted to draw on and work with the expertise that would come with that experience. And I could talk more about it in questions if people wanted, but obviously because of the pandemic, we had to go online. So we had to develop online ways of working, but none of us, I think, had worked online before. So among the academic team, there was expertise in participatory approaches, but not in the online space. And but we addressed that, and we got to working online. And the kind of key infrastructure initially was that we had online diaries, so parents could complete online diaries at any time. They could respond to what we called our big questions of the week, which are video elicited questions that myself or a member of the team or a parent would pose, and then it would be a video and they could respond any way they liked, and then they could take part in what we called our big ideas groups. And these were online meetings where we come together and we share experiences. So we used to start the sessions by sharing our COVID realities in small groups, and then we would have kind of discussion about policy and policy change and recommendations for change. And I think one of the really exciting, well, one of the most exciting things about the project was the way that that online way of working opened up the opportunity to bring people together from all parts of the UK in a way which would not be possible financially, face to face. And people reported feeling a great deal of peer support and solidarity through having those connections. The other thing that we decided is that we were very much trying to work with the grain of people's lives. So the big ideas meetings always happen in the evening, and the idea was that a lot of the people we were working with were single parents, and they wanted to try and put their children to bed or get them settled, and then come online and have what they would often describe as me time. The participatory approach is very much underpinned by feminist research praxis, sort of very much ethics of care, and reciprocity really underpins everything we do. And we have we did a toolkit, and one of the things that was on the toolkit is like sweat the small stuff. And I actually think I could just maybe that's all I ever need to say about anything. It's just that getting the small stuff right is so important. So in the online space, we were trying to think about how we would translate like an ethics of care into an online world. And we thought about how whenever I used to do participation meetings face to face, I would always carry massive bags of shopping and different snacks and things to make sure that the people came together and they enjoyed the chance to have a cup of tea and a nice drink and something to eat. But how could we do that online? And so we developed this thing that we send out snack packs for each meeting, so that people get a letter saying, we're looking forward to seeing you online, here's a little packet of biscuits, a hot chocolate that you can just add water to, so there's something, there's a sense of coming together, and they can feel that care, I think, in those physical, those kind of quite material things that we do. Across the project, we take a really sort of flexible approach to engagement, so it's very much people dip in and out as they want to over time, they choose what they want to do. And I guess just to say as well that we would do the project, I think initially was maybe 18 months, and then obviously 5 years on, we're still here. And that's very much driven by the parents, right? So the parents want to, and it's also driven by that context of current crisis. So we went obviously from the pandemic into the cost of living crisis, and so the work became as important as ever, and it kind of rebranded as changing realities. But we keep going, and there isn't any sign of that changing. And like I said already, there's different elements to it, but I think what's really important is that we're both generating new knowledge, but we're productively and unashamedly pushing for change, and we're supporting parents and carers to speak up and out, whether through media interventions, whether through policy meetings with politicians. And so just to say that as of now, we've been growing recently, so there's almost 200 parents and carers taking part. So it's a really big group of people. And last night, actually, we had a big ideas meeting, and I think we had 65 to 70 on the call. So that's a lot of people that you're trying to support and facilitate. And as I've said, on that flexible engagement, we're often we're trying to balance different preferences, and our role is very much around facilitation and support. So very often, and in a lot of what we do, it's about stepping back and being in that supportive facilitation role. I think, and again, this is something I could just say every day, all day, the work that we do is like incredibly time intensive, but also very emotionally intensive. It's very, very ethically fraught, very, very ethically difficult. It's also really gendered, like really, really gendered. So it's work that is done by women, and there's been an interesting like critical turn recently in kind of some of this participatory lived experience work. I think it's worth saying that it's been led quite a lot by men, and I think there's something quite interesting and problematic about that, because actually the women that I know that do this work, we do it very critically, but we just don't have time to write the journal articles and do the critical engagement because we're busy doing the other stuff. So I might pretend that way. Yeah. Okay, so this just gives you a little bit of a sense of that sort of participant journey, how people sign up, the fact that they see the middle one as an example of a big question they would see. Also important to stress that all the online diary entries that people share, they go through like an anonymization process and a 7-day kind of withdrawal window, but then they're reshared through our living archive. It's now got thousands and thousands of entries. And I think last year there were maybe 2,000 new entries of people sharing diary entries. And that the online dashboard was kind of, it's like a bespoke online software, I guess, that we've developed. Digital infrastructure, but also that was co-produced. So when we were developing that back in 2020, we were working with early participants to kind of think about how does this work, how can we make it better. And try another video that's just parents. Oh no, yeah, parents.
This pandemic changes everything. To recover from this up and down, we need some platform.
There's all different ways that the project has pulled people together to get a concise picture of what's going on and what's affecting us.
For instance, the zine,
the book, audio,
Big Ideas group was a collective of all of us together.
So it was like once a week answering a question.
Actually, the diaries were something which was more personal.
It was almost like just Facebook or Twitter posts with a little bit more detail in them.
All of these online things were very new in the beginning for us. It's quite straightforward to go into, so we didn't have to remember any passwords.
So whether you had a smartphone, whether you had a computer, whether you didn't have a computer, there was some way of accessing it.
We're listening each other. That's the best thing of anything.
The community that we've built, it's phenomenal.
There's just a sense of understanding that knowledge is power, that we together, even as far away as Northern Ireland, that we are all connected through this project.
It's just it always does, but no, it's not. Okay, so now, see, I told you it was like a bit, we're jumping around a bit. So now we know a little bit about changing reality. So now I just want to think about hope and how we might think about hope. And then the final piece of the jigsaw is around applying hope to work like changing realities. So I think when we look, and there's a really, really rich literature around how we might theorize hope. And I think some of the things that we found less useful, but they're also really important, are these ideas of hope as being kind of a way of hiding from the reality almost of the situation, or as supporting resilience in really, really difficult times. So reliant on like hope is cruel optimism, or MOOF, which we pronounced wrong, talking about like the end of hope. So it being very difficult to hope against contemporary context. And then I think we see a lot of dichotomous theorizations of hope, as either being passive or active, or a way of coping with the present, or orientating towards a different future. And I think what we would argue, and again, working with lots of other literature, is that it's much messier than that, right? Lots of different things at different times. So in terms of how we conceptualize it in the work that we find really useful here, so Les Back has written quite a lot about hope, and really helpfully, and he says, that hope is not a destination or an achievement, but an improvisation across time that links the past, present, and not yet realized future. And I think we would say, and we would argue, that there's a constant reworking and rethinking of hope as our future horizons change, as our presence shifts. So thinking of it in that way is helpful. And then we found the work of Rebecca Solnit, and I don't know their first names, but Duggan and Monez, really helpful in this idea that actually feelings of despair and anger can actually fuel hope and make the work of hope possible. So actually, if we think about all of that stuff that we looked at earlier around the contemporary moment, and what, that actually those feelings of anger and despair, they can actually create a space where we want to, and we feel committed to hope and to build something that's different. And then again, that's something that Freire and Sarah Ahmed have argued about, that hope animates struggle and resistance. So it actually brings it to life and makes it possible, which I think we find that really helpful. I also think Jonathan Lear's work on radical help is really useful as well. Because of time, I won't read it out more, but he says that what makes hope radical is that it's directed to a future goodness that transcends the current ability to understand what it is. So he's kind of saying, he talks elsewhere, like, we don't actually know, it's not that we can see what's to come, but we're committed to working for it and to working towards a different future. And often we don't have the power, so it's not about having the power to make the change. I just want to say briefly, because it kind of links in, that there's some, obviously, and a lot of you will be aware of it, there's some interesting work as well on utopian thinking, and that utopia as method, and kind of encouraging us and pushing us to move beyond thinking about the narrow confines of what is possible to what is necessary. And that's very, very relevant to social policy, isn't it? So to all of our work. And Ruth Levitas has written a lot about that in terms of utopia as method, and Kaba suggests we could even think of utopia as a discipline. And I haven't, acknowledgement of lack of time, but I haven't read it properly. But Rebecca Hewer and I think Ben Collier have just got a new piece in Journal of Social Policy that's looking at developing a new method of critical utopian policy analysis. So that's interesting, I think. So thinking about hope and working through and with hope within the context of COVID and then changing realities. These are difficult quotes to read, difficult quotes for you to engage with, but this is a quote from Victoria, who was a participant in the project from the very beginning, and she talks about receiving a food parcel during those early days of the pandemic, and it contained mouldy bread. And she said, "It's emotionally difficult to think I've been reduced to asking for stale and mouldy bread. I feel guilty for needing to access such assistance. I feel guilty for bidding some of the produce given, and I feel shame. At the moment, I felt disgusted with myself. What kind of mother does it make me?" So, this is the despair, the anger, the shame that people are living with and living through and working through, partly through the project. And then this is something that she wrote for us when we wrote a book from COVID Realities about the pandemic, and this was in the forward, I think, and this was her reflecting on it, and I think about that hope work as well. So she says, "People like to look back on history and read the diaries of real people telling their real stories and experiences of troubles that history books marked by dates and policies. To the future people who read this study, who read about the plights of us low-income families, know that I thank you for taking the time to look back on our nation's past. And heed this, learn from our mistakes, value your undervalued. Maybe one day my children or grandchildren might read this study, might see these articles. Maybe someone will read about the woman who cries over bread. Perhaps people can learn from our voices. I'd be happy to be a whisper in history if in the future no one is left free in homelessness or starvation. We have the resources. I hope the future will be more empathetic." And I think obviously there's lots in that, but that holding of hope, and also that this kind of idea of being a whisper in history is very evocative and important. But I think just acknowledging the complexity of all of this ethically as well. So what are our hopes? What are those hopes realizable? So in terms of pulling this out a bit more, what motivates people to get involved in post-COVID and changing realities, and then reflecting back on that stuff we talked about the theorization of hope. It is that often it is an anger and despair at the status quo. So people are fed up, they're really fed up, and there's a feeling that things must change. And I think we often see a desire for the solidarity that comes with working together, and a want to get support from peers. So those are some of the things that motivate people to take part. And I think, and what we sort of tried to argue in the article that I mentioned that I did with Maddie Power, is that when we think about work of resistance, work of hope, and participatory practice, we can start to think about some of that practice as a form of hope labour. So we can use those building blocks, theorisation of hope, to think about participatory research sometimes as being a form of hope labour. And I think some of the kind of reasons for this are around obviously the fact that participatory research is often direct, it has a change ambition, it's explicit about its change ambition. And it can also, the coming together that it involves can help challenge stigma and create communities of resistance. And that's especially important around poverty, where the stigma that people feel often makes it very difficult for them to feel able to speak out. But also, and I think this is really important, and it's something we'll come back to, is that participatory approaches can be aimed at difficult, we would argue even maybe radical futures, both because of the substantive policy change that they're seeking to enact, but also because they're like foregrounding a different way of working and of collaborating that like values diversity of voices and expertise, and also tries to kind of promote collaboration, you know, rather than competition. And again, and just to really like say this out loud, that is obviously very different from the values that are championed in like neoliberal academy. So it's like it's intention, but it's still possible, I think. So we would just suggest that projects like Changing Realities can be conceptualized as a form of hope labour, and really importantly, we're saying that, you know, everyone involved in those endeavours is part of that of the enactment of hope labour. And they can also, that projects such as these, and there's lots of others, can create the conditions that potentially make the practice of hope possible as well. And just again, just fleshing this out more, thinking about it in different ways, that if we're going to think about that ambition to make change happen, what are the different domains in which we seek change? And I think we can map these, you know, simplistically, I guess, but onto kind of change of policy, change of process, but also personal change. Okay, so in terms of policy process, so these were just some quotes from diary entries and responses from participants about some of these different hopes that they held and things they were working towards. So on policy, Etta says, you know, and this is kind of interesting given where we are in 2025, but she says, you know, my main hope is that we get a new government in 2024 that works to eradicate all the issues that current government have caused over the last 20 years. I'm trying not to have any fears. I'm staying positive that 2024 will be the year we can make a real difference to society and have a lot less people living in poverty. So there we see a very clear articulation of a hope around policy. And then Kim, you know, it's not loads on process, but she says, you know, with Changing Realities, I hope that we can continue to strive for reform. So she is talking about the act of collaboration, the act of the push, and I think that the act of working together to push for change. And then this is really important, is around Caroline articulating an ambition for personal change. And again, remembering that all of the parents that we work with are generally living below the poverty line, living on a low income. And so that personal ambition for change obviously is intermeshed with and in some ways reliant on the policy change as well. But Caroline says, I guess what I hope to achieve through Changing Realities is that I can change, improve my learning and experience, and then share my knowledge and motivate others struggling to take part and to use their voice in the best way we can. So a very personal ambition. And then some just reflections. I'll sort of skip through these, but you know, the change that is happening. So I think that we can see some of those changes occurring and how people reflect on and talk about their participation. So Evelyn says, you know, she's found the experience being involved uplifting. She says, I become an activist. I become a person who sees the truth behind so many things. That's priceless. So the experience of participation and involvement being really important. And then Libby saying, we're more than just families spread across the country. We're actually a community of people coming together for the better good of the community. So, you know, what does that mean? How does that feel to be part of the project? Okay.
They say it takes a village, and COVID Realities became that village for me.
There's the trust is built up like this, even online, even in a Zoom event.
A variety of different people from all corners of the UK, but we've all got similar problems with sort of bringing up children on a low income.
It gives participants like myself the opportunity to come forward and speak about not only their experiences, but also their ideas for reform.
It's definitely given more confidence to speak up, and especially doing the interviews for newspaper and magazine reports.
Even if it's just adding my voice to one little rallying cry, that might be part of the building blocks of changing this country for the best for our children in the future.
When I tell you that COVID Realities was a lifeline to many of us.
Is a COVID reality is like a whole one box. We are in the box, same box.
Participatory practice can never be underestimated in the power that it has for those that are participating.
None of us feel like we're fighting this alone anymore.
Okay, so that was just again reflections on that work and on the way in which they've been working together to hope. So again, we're doing the jump. So we're going to jump back now to the child property strategy. And I said before that changing realities, you know, has a sort of role in that child property strategy. And I think you know, all that is, or not all that is that when the Cabinet Office, you know, committed to child property strategy, and when they released their sort of first, I guess, position paper on what they were going to do, how they're going to develop the strategy, they've made this explicit commitment to working with the voices of people with direct experience of poverty, and they said explicitly changing realities. And to date, that's taken like a number of forms. So we've been doing some focused big questions that are for the child poverty unit. So members of the child poverty unit have themselves been asking big questions, and then we've been gathering all the responses and sharing them with the child poverty unit to give them sort of real-time evidence base to support some of their thinking. And then we've also had ministerial engagement. So we've had a meeting with Alison McGovern, who's the Minister for Employment. So that was like one of our online evening Zooms, which was yeah, I had this real like dilemma about, do I still do it at home with all my kids running up and down the stairs? Maybe I was like, well, it's no different. Like, so we did it like that. But anyway, it's fine. So yeah, so we've done an online session with Alison McGovern with about 12 parents. We did a meeting in Scotland with Liz Kendall, Alison McGovern, and about 6 parents that was then linked to a roundtable event. I'll show you in a minute, but we also did an event, that's the flagship thing at Downing Street with, I think, 12 parents, Bridget Phillips and Alison McGovern and quite a lot of civil servants, and we're having like regular meetings with officials, and so this is quite, I guess, it's quite a lot, there's a lot of engagement, and I think the engagement feels very much like working with and through that hope, and working with that complexity and messiness of a government that is publicly saying some very difficult things on social security and on poverty, and then is privately saying, no, we really do want to get this right. But then, you know, we're working with parents who are feeling a lot of those feelings of despair and anger when they see the political announcements we've seen. So I think one of the things that I maybe could and should have said earlier is that when we're working with hope, one of our kind of key premises is that immediately heightens the ethical tensions or the ethical challenges of working that way when we openly say, no, this is kind of hope labour, this is hope-based work. And I think those ethical risks, we can really see those writ large with this process. So, you know, when there was a moment, a very symbolic and important moment of people being invited into Downing Street, but what does that actually mean, and what will it actually mean for the strategy? And I'm sure lots of you have different thoughts on that, but, you know, will it actually lead to change? And I think how do we hold those things? How do we support people through those is really, really difficult. So I think acknowledging that working with hope is really hard going, but also it's very like it's worth doing, right? And it's a kind of culmination, I think. So to be outside Downing Street and inside Downing Street with all those parents was you know, is meaningful and is kind of a big deal. And I just wanted to share, this is a piece that Jo Barker-Marsh, one of the parents, wrote about for the big issue, about how she felt, you know, about it. And she said, I hope the government can see that we speak from the depths of ourselves and with the knowledge of shared space and support we know is around us, that we want to share that the reality of life in a low-income families, for children and young people, and we hope that our stories can help to inform change. We began COVID realities by sharing our truth. We grew together as a community and always a team were responsive. Our ground rules emerged very quickly and now form the cornerstone of this powerful community. For many of us, our engagement with Change Realities project is born out of a shared desire to reach out and find others who get what we were feeling and experiencing. Our sharing in this safe space and on this platform developed for us has become a rich, raw and endlessly surprising social archive. This night before Downing Street is 1,000 Christmas Eves. It's our dream come true. I will never forget how we got here or underestimate the power of community and pushing for change. This is how we change our realities. And I think, again, like, you can hear and you can feel, hopefully, in those words that optimism, but the weight of that optimism, I think we have to really acknowledge, and we have to, and you know, and it's worth saying as well that, you know, if Jo was here now, she would say, you know, she's absolutely not naive. She totally gets, you know, she gets the scale of the challenge, but I think that there's an awful lot in that as well. So we can think about this both with relation to child poverty strategy, but more broadly with participatory practice, that there are real ethical risks and challenges of working with and through hope. And I think one of those that probably the primary one that we would always come back to is the different stakes for those taking part in the participatory endeavour. So the fact that for me, as my current socioeconomic situation is, whether or not we do see action, say to end the 2-child limit, won't make a material difference to my life overnight, but it will to many of those taking part. And I think that holding that and being transparent and honest about that is really, really important. But it also makes it beholden on us to be very open and transparent. And again, we can come back to it if she's from the questions. But one of our kind of key things that we've worked through is how we actually take quite an anti-paternalist approach to some of this stuff. So there might be a tendency to go, oh no, well, we've got to avoid doing that because people might think that something's really going to happen, but it's not. And I think for us, it's about just being as open and transparent and honest with people, but not taking those decisions away from people as well. I also think that very often there's kind of what we would maybe articulate as a positive tension between pushing for and seeking what is often very radical change, which is required, and then accepting or also working towards more pragmatic and incremental policy change. And I think what we would say with that, and again, this is very much from what the parents that we're working with tell us, is, don't lose sight of the longer term vision, but don't let that stand in the way of stepping stones along the way. And also because if we think that the way of working is itself potentially important and meaningful, that if you can get some change on something small, but do it in a way that is quite radical, maybe even, that in itself may have other things. And one of the things that we found useful here is to have principles, so to have overarching principles that guide our work in terms of the social security system we want to see. This was especially important under the last government, but I think is increasingly important, or is still important now, is how far we think about or talk about a change-making frame or an accountability frame. And I think that with the participatory work we've done, especially under the last government, it was partly about accountability. It sort of goes back in a bit to what Victoria was saying in that quote about it being a bit whisper of history. It was about saying we may not, and being open with participants, we may not be able to get them to move on, I don't know, like getting rid of the £20 uplift to universal credit, but we need to make sure that there is a sense of accountability, or there is a documentation about what those decisions mean, what they mean for families. And I think that'd be valuable. Okay, so you'll be pleased to know, coming towards the end, I don't think I'm over time yet, but I just want to acknowledge a lot of the tensions that have kind of been surfacing in this talk. And I think there's a really important thing to think about how might we support like hope labour or participatory practice within the neoliberal academy. And I think, like I've said, and like I've tried to say to get out of this not being as polished as it might be, that there is never enough time. So time is just that's our working condition, our working environment. And so what might it mean to give up and make time for this kind of work against that context? And I think that's also very difficult for people that are experiencing precarity, so within a kind of publisher peril culture. And I would say that it's beholden on those of us who do have security to model different ways of researching, so that actually to try and challenge some of that. And definitely, I mean, I do feel cross about it, but like on COVID reality and child changing realities, we've barely published in Germany. We really haven't published very much, and this is like a 5-year project, because we've just been too busy doing and supporting. But I think that those are they're kind of decisions that I would stand by ethically, but they are, I don't know, my university won't thank me, and but anyway, so I think well, whatever. So and then again, and I said this before, but I think that the gender nature of this work is really important, and I would like to see more done to understand that and to reflect on what that means, especially because of how that then sits alongside the way it's doing work that isn't valued so much within the academy. I think it's quite radical. I think we need to do more to celebrate it. And then I guess I would say that perhaps all of us, including those who don't do this work, can think about how we might think of our role as academics sometimes being to give up rather than take up space. So thinking about standing back to let others come forward, to thinking about challenging. You know, if we're having a discussion around poverty, social security, I don't know, anything, immigration, lots of policy areas, who's around the table, what expertise is counted, what expertise is excluded. We can all do that. We can all think about. I just think that the nature of academia is that we're always, and I'm doing it now, so it's ironic, but we're encouraged to take up space, but really giving up that space is important, is valuable, and thinking about how we might support others who are undertaking that work. And like I say, and like I've said, hopefully across this thing, there's lots more to be done on critically engaging this work. So I don't think, and I hope it doesn't seem like, I don't think that changing realities is, well, I think it's like a piece of work that I feel like proud of on some level, but I also think there's lots of problems with it, lots of tensions, lots of difficulties, lots of, yeah, so I think, so there's always more to be done to critically engage with it. But I also think that should stop us from trying, or like from trying to do this stuff. Okay, so yeah, this is like really, I don't even know why I'm showing this, but anyway, so one of the things we do through Changing Realities is that we have a shared fieldwork diary. So we have a shared fieldwork diary where we can write about stuff and we sometimes share them, and you know, but it's very much a space for us as the kind of research team to reflect on what we're doing. And last week I was saying to Tanya, we were on a writing retreat, and it wasn't that grand, but anyway, so this is my diary from last week, and I just wrote, like, I'm writing this at the grand kitchen table at the end of our first day of a writing retreat, at which we need to make some progress with our book on participation method. It's good to be with some of the others in the team, but there's also a bit of discomfort around the fact we're in it, about the comfort we're in as we write, with access to cool sauna and steam, nice food and fancy coffee. I know that we all work hard and this time together is both necessary and has to be productive, but I feel, as I do so often, a bit embarrassed as I imagine how participants would view it if they could see into us sitting around this table, writing and working away, but losing privilege and comfort. Sometimes I really don't know how we do it and how we allow ourselves to hold the two things together, the brutal realities of participants' daily lives, our collaboration and our own privilege. But then I'm also not sure what the alternative is, or what a more honest path would be. But I sometimes think I shy away from stark confrontation on the hypocrisy that characterises perhaps so much of our day-to-day work. I don't know. And I just think that maybe is inappropriate, or it's nearly an end to what I've saying, is that this is all like, yeah, it's all fraught with problems and critique, but also like sometimes it's hard to see what the alternative is. And I won't do this because of time, but you know, this is again from that New Republic article. But you know, he sort of says, you know, he's talking particularly about climate breakdown. But you know, he says about hope as a sort of drawing on Havel and mention of the soul. And he says, if we can cultivate that kind of hope and regularly water it with righteous anger, I think we can make it through these next 4 years. And whatever's on the side of that, and whatever inside that, it's not the brightest vision, but it's a long haul approach, and this is a long haul struggle, one that will continue to be worth fighting no matter how dark it gets. And then just to really end now, so Gemma, who we heard from about sharing a bed with her children, in the end to her piece in The Guardian, she wrote, like, I sometimes find it difficult to imagine how a situation can get better, but it really has to, because life should not be this hard. This year, the government will publish a child poverty strategy setting out the action it will take to address record rates of poverty affecting more than 4 million children. It needs to be bold and make real change happen by investing in social security and providing more support with essential costs of the additional needs of families with children. Next winter has to be better for families like mine. There is no other choice. And I think, again, that is a sort of driving force around everything we do.